Hey, yo, good morning.
Good morning.
Great, you made it.
I did indeed. I did indeed. I'm here. I'm very excited.
Great. So same here, same here. We have 600 signups or so that's not bad at all.
Excellent.
I think the excitement is shared.
Great.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make you the host,
Lovely.
and that means that you have full control over everything, over sharing stuff and polls, etc.
Okay.
It also means that I'm no longer the host, so I'm still here, but I can't control what's happening in the screen.
No worries. Are you if I ask you anything, for example, if I want to know what's going on in the chat, can you respond?
Of course, of course. I'll be here
Okay.
and I can still talk. Yeah.
That's great. Perfect.
Okay, here you go.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Okay, so it's 10 or 1 minute past 10, so I think we can get going right away. Shall I introduce you, or maybe it's better if you do it yourself with the whole history and the PhD and the different companies?
Yeah. So my name is Jo. I'm currently doing a PhD focused on the workplace collaboration in the metaverse. That's keeping me very busy. I also work for an incredible company called Omnipresent, that's helping distributed teams work better together and hire internationally as well. And I also used to work at Epic Games as well. So I have quite a lot of insight into the gaming side of things.
Fantastic. So I think you're very well placed to do the lecture today. So super happy to have you, and thanks for joining. And yeah, let's start.
Let's start. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and let's hope that everything works as it should.
And for the listeners, maybe a couple of house rules, right? So if you have questions, put them on the chat. And you have to make your life easy. Don't bother about reading the chat while you're speaking, because I know it's almost impossible. So I'll collect all the questions for you and I'll ask them at the right point in time. And I think another topic that I should always mention: if you want a certificate for joining, then please do send me an email right after the lecture ends. Not 2 weeks from now, because I'll forget, but right after. Okay. Let's go.
Let's go. Great. Thanks, friends, and thanks for having me. And hello to everyone. So I'm going to keep this fairly visual. This is how I like to talk. There's not going to be too many words on the screen, but I may say a lot of words. So if at any point it's getting too much, just say slow down, Jo, in the chat box, and Renzel will tell me to do so. So I wanted to start with a question today. So when was the last time you had a great idea or felt super inspired? You can drop it into the chat box now. Think about where you were, who you were with, what you were doing, and yeah, so those ideas, the ones that give you butterflies and make you want to do things. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna see if I can see the chat.
I think you can. So someone said yesterday, so I think that's a lucky individual.
Yeah. Yeah.
For
Great.
me, it was while running. So I have it when I'm not working. So when I'm
One of
running.
these exercise people. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Cool. So I will hasten a bet that nobody said that it was during a video call. Because in my highly scientific and humble opinion, video calls suck. But I'm not here just to slam video calls. I want to go into a little bit more about this and where this has all come from. So I'm lucky enough to have worked remotely for a lot of my career, and it really it's fantastic in so many ways. And without the great technology we have today, without video calls, remote work would be would be impossible. It would certainly be very difficult to have a meeting on top of Table Mountain like I was in this picture. And just a couple of years ago, I was in the small minority of knowledge workers who were working 100% remotely. A remote work hipster, if you will. I like to think of it like that. But of course, then this crazy thing called the pandemic happened. And this steady trend towards remote work suddenly got this massive push. So companies who were, they were quietly driving along, enjoying the scenery, maybe testing out a little bit of flexible working here and there, giving people, maybe even hybrid or, crazy stuff like that. They were suddenly flung into this rapidly changing situation whereby entire workforces had to suddenly work from home. And so what we ended up with here was that this slow trend suddenly became a paradigm shift. And this, this paradigm shift has completely changed how we actually work. And, just to put this in a little bit of perspective, just a couple of months ago in February, about 59% of knowledge workers in the US were working from home most or all of the time. Now, of course, during the pandemic, this was at much higher rates, almost 100% in some instances with lockdowns happening. But what we're seeing now is this leveling out, because pre-pandemic, it was tiny numbers. Very few people knowledge workers were working from home all of the time. So this leveling out, this shows that in a kind of a situation whereby we're not necessarily post-pandemic, but we're in a situation where there's not so many lockdowns in place, the motivations of workers have changed. So people aren't working from home necessarily because they're worried about going into an office space and catching COVID. Their reasons are because they spent all of this time working remotely, realizing that they are productive, they can do it, and they like it. They're getting far more work-life balance. And other motivations are some offices didn't reopen. So there's certain companies that are remote only, remote first. I mean, Airbnb had an announcement just last week, I think, saying that they're going to be remote for everybody forever. And other companies have done the same. And then some companies have put in place a hybrid approach, whereby some people can work from home some days, and then they'll go in for meetings or other such occurrences. And then we've got this other trend that is the Great Resignation or the Great Reshuffle. And, with the Great Resignation, there's a lot at play here. But at its foundations, people have really started to look at their lives and look at, what do they want for their careers? What kind of life do they want? And have really reassessed how their career and how their work life fits into the rest of their life. But more recent term here is the reshuffle, because people aren't just resigning, they're not leaving the workforce, they're moving to companies that can offer them that flexibility, that can offer them the kind of careers and lives that they want. And then from the business's perspective, many organizations were quite surprised that their employees were in many instances more productive. They started doing better work in these remote work situations, in these work from home situations. And now they've realized that they don't just need to hire in a certain location. So suddenly this whole massive global talent pool has opened up to businesses around the world. So you may be a Silicon Valley software firm, and you can't find enough talent. There's just not enough talent in the Valley now. But that doesn't matter. You can hire the best person anywhere in the world. And this is a huge, huge paradigm shift. However, there's always a but. So when we became a far more remote workforce, we went to the tools that we knew best. And those are things like video calls. So video calls for our team collaboration is what we were comfortable with. It's what we knew. However, our over-reliance on these video calls is hurting our ability to be creative as a team. And so creativity in our workplaces is under threat. And this is a massive problem, because creativity isn't just for artists and musicians. It's what drives innovation in our workplaces. And without it, we can't solve all the problems that we have as organizations, as governments, as humanity. And you don't just need to take my word for it here. So LinkedIn recently put some research together and named creative thinking the most in-demand skill. If you can think of all of the skills that you need in the workforce, creative thinking was the number one. WEF, the World Economic Forum, they named creativity as the third most important business skill. And this was only behind complex problem solving and critical thinking, which arguably creativity come into in some way or another as well. And it's no coincidence that these skills are far harder to automate. You can't get technology that can do this, not yet anyway. So in this post-knowledge era, it's these skills that make us most human. It's these ones that are most desired and greatest demand, and will continue to be. So coming back to the lowly video call, you may have been told to turn your camera on during video calls so that people can more easily connect with you. And this makes a lot of sense on the surface level because, well, as an individual, I don't like speaking to a blank screen. It's not fun. And, also until recently, we assumed that the added body language and facial expressions helped us collaborate better. And even evolutionarily speaking, we know that body language is really important. Our first ancestors, the I can't even say it now, Ardipithecus, and this is like my anthropology hat on here. They evolved like some 7 million years ago. And even before we could speak, we would use facial expressions and then later hand gestures to communicate with each other. So this all makes a lot of sense, sure, but it's not the whole story. And research done by Carnegie Mellon University has found that turning our cameras on during video calls is actually shown to lower our collective intelligence. And this impacts our ability to do creative teamwork. So we really have two ways of getting synchrony. We need to achieve synchrony in communication in order for it to be successful. And the two ways we can do this in a video call is through facial expressions and via prosody. So prosody is the tone and rhythm of speech. And with these two things, you can best find out if somebody wants to interject, if somebody's got an idea and would like to converse with you. So this recent research here found that the video cues actually disrupted the conversational flow. So this led to the collective intelligence being lowered and therefore poorer collaborative outcomes, poorer creative collaboration. So in short here then, the video aspect of it completely screwed with our prosodic communication. And you may relate to this. If you're anything like me on a video call, your attention's super divided. So you're trying to look at people's faces, usually which you can't quite make out if it's beyond a certain number. Then you're trying to listen to what people are saying, but you're also looking at yourself and making sure you've got no food on your face or anything. And it just doesn't feel like a very natural way to communicate. And it's not. So for millennia, our human ancestors who evolved to be creative just in order to survive, they did so in 3D environments. And that's just how our brains are wired. So it's been relatively recently, about 40,000 years, I think, since we started, for example, painting on the side of caves. So started this kind of 2D approach to thinking about the world around us. And then it's only been a blink of an eye then, since we suddenly got distracted by these glowing 2D screens. And these 2D flat screens were designed to display things. It's called display technology for a reason. We were never meant to communicate through them. So if video calls are confusing, they hurt our creativity and they lower our collective intelligence, then why are we still using them? And when I ask this question, and this was where my research started, these were the questions that got me thinking. People say that it's the best we have, or it's the closest thing we can get to real life. And I was like, So firstly, is this really the best we have with all of the amazing technology we have today? And secondly, what's so good about real life anyway? And so I started writing this research about, what if rather than trying to recreate the reality we have around us, why don't we try and make something better? Now, there's already a multi-billion-dollar industry doing this, instantly transporting you somewhere else, enabling you to be present and creative with people from around the world in really exciting environments. And that, of course, is the games industry. So many games are laying the foundation for the metaverse. Now, there's lots of different definitions of this. I know this has been covered extensively by other speakers, so I won't go into too much detail here. But my view of the metaverse and how I define it is that it's an evolved, experiential, immersive 3D version of the internet. And Matthew Ball, fantastic thinker in Metaverse Spaces. If you haven't read his stuff, please do. I know it's been recommended previously as well. But he's got a fantastic definition as well, although it is quite dense because it's a complex topic. I don't usually read off the screen, but I will today because I think it's important. So the metaverse is a massively scaled and interoperable network of real-time rendered 3D virtual worlds. Oh, this thing's falling off, sorry, which can be experienced synchronously and persistently by an effectively unlimited number of users with an individual sense of presence and with continuity of data such as identity, history, entitlements, objects, communications, and payments. Now, this is really, there's a lot there. So I'm going to grab that because it's going to knock my water over. We don't want that. So yeah, so I think with this is that we really need to think about breaking this down a little bit. One of the big things in this is the idea of persistence. And in this sense, we're talking about persistence being, it doesn't turn off, let's put it that way. So, when I'm explaining this to my mum, I thought, she thinks about a game, you're playing your game, you turn it off and it stops. Obviously, this does not happen with the metaverse. It's continuing on. And this is why I like to frame it in the sense of the internet. So we'll go into a couple more of these concepts in a little while. But another thing is the metaverse is not new. It's very trendy right now. Thanks Zuck for that. And if we look back, the term itself was coined in 1992 in Neil Stephenson's novel Snow Crash, and fantastic novel if you haven't read it. I've read it originally when I went to university. My dad was a huge sci-fi fan. He kept putting the book in front of my face, and finally when I was 19, I was like, okay, Dad, I'll read it. And it started my love affair with sci-fi and probably my love affair with emerging technology as well. So got my dad to thank for being persistent there. So then in 1995, Cybertown was launched. Now, Cybertown, I didn't use it as early as 95. I think it's about 99, late 90s, early 2000s when I was on Cybertown. And I specifically remember coming home from school getting off the school bus, saying goodbye to my friends, going back home and getting online and going and visiting my other friends in Cybertown. Many who I hadn't met before, and it was great. We had jobs, we had possessions, we'd hold parties. It was a 3D social virtual environment that you could access on your browser. And I think back then it was still dial-up as well, possibly. I don't know, maybe we had fiber by then, I'm not sure, but it wasn't great internet, so it took some time to get on. I think also I think I was a librarian in Cybertown. I had to deal with it's as exciting as it sounds anyway. And this was a predecessor to Second Life. So Second Life, that you may have heard of, launched in 2003. Then we're getting into the ones that are still very popular today. Roblox, 2006. People often don't realize that it's been around that long. Minecraft, 2009. And then we've got Fortnite, launched in 2017. So when we talk about these gaming virtual worlds, I've got lots of friends with kids. I have kids as well, but they're very little and not gaming yet. Won't be long. But my friends with children will often come to me and say, "Oh, my child's spending too much time playing Minecraft or Roblox or Fortnite." And I try to remind them that these aren't just games, right? So that they're hanging out with their friends. These are social virtual worlds as much as gaming virtual worlds. They're often practicing really important life skills like empathy and teamwork. And importantly for me, they're often creating and innovating in these spaces as well. Certainly a lot more than I am after my 5th video call of the day. So coming to virtual reality now, it's not synonymous with the metaverse. And it's important to point this out. I often hear people saying that they're entering the metaverse and actually they've just played a VR game. That's not necessarily the case. But it is one of the most powerful technologies we have to enter some of these 3D virtual spaces. And I believe that VR is really one of the keys we have to reigniting this lost creativity we have in the workplace. So looking at VR then, after arguably a few false starts. So in 2020, just a couple of years ago, the market was only worth about 4.42 billion. But it's projected to be worth 84.09 by 2028. And I think this is a compound annual growth rate of 45%-ish. My bad math skills, but it's a lot. And yeah, I mean, it's incredible. And traditionally, we've seen this growth of the VR market being driven by the consumer space. But more and more, we're now seeing it being driven by enterprise. And these 3D interactive experiences are now hitting various different areas of our lives. And one that happened, I think it was last year, that just blew my mind was that the US Army paid Microsoft $22 billion for a customized version of the Microsoft HoloLens headset, so that they could put together training using mixed reality. So really very real lifelike training using mixed reality, so that soldiers could rehearse and, before they went out and did it for real. So there's an incredible amount of money here. But, it's also being driven by the fact that the hardware is much cheaper now. So, you can pick up a decent consumer headset for far less than the laptop that I'm currently on. And because of that, now better and more applications as well, both on the consumer side and on the enterprise. And we're seeing there a kind of a democratization of being able to create these 3D virtual worlds through engines such as Unreal Engine from Epic and Unity and others as well. So it's a really exciting time for VR, and it's growing at an incredible pace. So coming back to a little bit more of my theoretical thinking here. So I've done, as you might imagine, a lot of reading on virtual reality. And I see the three key factors or themes in VR as being immersion, interaction, and imagination. So immersion first. Now, immersion's a really interesting concept, primarily because it's super complex. And there's no real consensus as to what it actually means. And, with my academic brain, I love that. I love being able to go in and seeing whether, can I help define this? And I see it split in two ways here. So you've got the spatial or physical immersion, and then you've got the emotional or psychological immersion, and they're both quite different. So with the spatial immersion, arguably VR is the only way of achieving this. It's fairly objective. You either are not immersed or you are immersed when it comes to spatial physical immersion. That's when your senses are completely isolated from your real environment and put into a different virtual environment. And the technology is coming on so amazingly that you won't just be able to see, hear, and feel things in VR, but you'll be able to taste and smell them too. It's often called the Internet of Senses. It's coming, it's here, and it's both terrifying and wonderful at the same time, but some really, really interesting technologies there. So then you've got the emotional, psychological immersion. And this tends to be far more subjective. So you might have someone that says, they're doing a certain activity or they're in a certain environment, and they say, oh, I feel really immersed, like very immersed in this. And then somebody else might be like, no, not so much for me. And so, whilst VR is really the only way to achieve spatial immersion, emotional and psychological immersion can be achieved in many ways. And you could see it as, people talk about, for example, being very immersed in a game, just a mobile game. Your senses aren't isolated. You're not spatially immersed, but perhaps you are emotionally immersed. And I see it as a bit of a scale. You can see this on a scale. So whilst on a video call, you're having an interesting conversation with someone, you might be somewhat immersed in that. But when you're in VR, you might feel more immersed. And so this is not an all or nothing like a spatial physical might be.
And that immersion, I think it's an interesting thing for people that have never experienced that in the call. I'm not sure how many people have a VR headset or have tried one. But one of the first things that we typically do is you have that plank exercise where you have to walk across a plank at very high altitude, yes, or the roller coaster experience that will make you completely dizzy and nauseous, right? So it is definitely very it's quite strong, that immersion, compared to a video call in 2D, right?
Very much so, yeah. And my husband was angry at me because I put my mother-in-law on Richie's plank on the plank act, and I filmed it. It was very funny, because you're in that environment. You're both spatially, physically immersed, but you're also psychologically immersed as well. And this is why it's really interesting, because there's lots of factors that play into this. If you're, I don't know if you've ever been using a VR headset and someone comes along and touches you on the arm and you weren't expecting it, and it pulls you out of that feeling of being totally immersed. And so there's distraction factors, and this is something that I'm looking at now, is what are all of the factors that can contribute to feelings of immersion, and how can we best utilize those?
And yeah. In an emotional sense, I'm quite curious because I felt I felt nauseous and scared, but I think you can feel more things, right? You can feel compassion for other people, maybe you can feel love, and also the more beautiful emotions. Any examples there that that work well enough?
There's amazing stuff. So from the compassion side, there's been some really interesting studies on, but I'm not going to say this particularly beautifully, but making people less racist. Mm-hmm. So you embody somebody's. So let's say you're a white woman, you may embody a black man, and you go into VR, and you can look at yourself in the mirror, and you can walk around, and they did quite extensive studies about people's attitudes. And it was longitudinal as well. So it meant that it wasn't just the attitude straight after the experience, it was an attitude that stayed with them. So there's some really interesting things on that level. And of course, in my research, what I'm really interested in is where there's a link between doing really good creative teamwork and being very empathetic. Mm-hmm. So being empathetic to people, both from the standpoint of respecting their views and being able to kind of put yourself in their shoes and where they're coming from, but also the point of view of, especially in the workplace, in remote environments, you often don't do the small talk. You miss the water cooler moments, and that's something that in VR it feels much more natural, kind of chatting to people about their day when you have that feeling of co-presence, which is this part here. And yeah,
if I'm not wrong, there's these new headsets. There's cameras on the inside that actually track your facial expressions, right? Like how you move your eyes and your mouth and these kind of things. So I've seen at least a couple of designs where then the avatar that you would represent in the virtual space would be able to mimic you a bit more than the current avatars, which are pretty static.
Yeah. No, exactly. And that's one thing, actually. Avatars are really interesting space. And if I had time one day to do another PhD, I would focus on avatars, because I'm really interested in how we get this situation of what we call kind of uncanny valley, whereby if it looks human but isn't quite human enough, you get this really uneasy feeling. It's like kind of creepy. It looks a bit like, I don't know, something from a horror movie. And that's why I think a lot of the softwares, a lot of the tools that we have, they kind of go down the cartoony route, because there's no point in, if you can't achieve that level of realism that you really need for people to be like, oh yeah, that's a human, that I can, then you need to do the cartoon, because otherwise it gets creepy.
Yeah, you end up with something like Sophia the robot, right? Which is it's almost there, but not really. Yeah.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Great.
Cool. No, so it's really interesting, and this plays really well into this idea of presence and co-presence. So with presence, that's that feeling of actually being somewhere, being in an environment, and then co-presence, you've got that feeling of being there with people, and this is why this helps with empathy and that feeling of togetherness. Really, I think that being in VR, like I'm talking to you, Rens, now, and I don't really feel that I'm with you. I'm not inhabiting a space with you. I think, if we were to go down a route and have a really in-depth philosophical discussion, I might feel a little bit more immersed and a bit more having that feeling of co-presence, but nowhere near the feeling that you get when you are in a virtual environment. and you have that kind of deeper sense there, which just isn't achievable with other technologies. So we can essentially, when it comes to the workplace, we can be together psychologically even when we're not, and this helps social creativity to thrive, and that's why it's a really important aspect of this. Yeah, so the point being, co-presence contributes towards social creativity. So the second magic eye is interaction. So with interaction here, the first point is that you can manipulate 3D objects. So if you can imagine you're designing some kind of 3D object, let's say a bag, and you imagine what you want that bag to look like, and you imagine it in 3D in your brain. And then when we get to the actual manufacturing of it, it's manufactured obviously as a 3D item. But often, traditionally, what would happen is that we would design it in 2D. Well, you may use a 3D software, so you can see it at different angles, but you would do it on a 2D screen. So we're coming back to that, using display technology for what is essentially a 3D activity. So by using VR instead to do this, you can do this in real time with your team. You can manipulate the object, you can co-create, and you can do it together in a virtual environment. So this is a very different way of thinking about design. Then we've got the rethinking collaboration tools. So in a face-to-face environment, you might use, I don't know, like a whiteboard, or you might use your laptop to do a bit of research while you're doing a brainstorm. And on Zoom, I saw Zoom, Zoom's got a whiteboard function, you've got Jamboards on Google, and there's different iterations of this. And then in virtual reality, there's often whiteboards as well, which is, I'll come to, I'm rolling my eyes here, mainly because there's so much more that you can do. And some tools do have these great things. So you can write in the air, and you can bring in pictures from your gallery on your computer or the internet, and you make them bigger or smaller depending on how important they are for that discussion at hand. And there's a great tool I used recently that does 3D mind mapping. So you're in a room, and I really enjoy mind mapping exercises. I do it a lot with my team at work, where we're looking at a particular problem, and we're trying to think of solutions or ideas that will help us overcome this issue or this problem. And you go to the first level, and then you take each of those ideas, and then you work out what you need to do in order to make this idea, put this idea into action. And this is a great tool because it's 3D, so you can move around it, and you can look at literally see your ideas from different perspectives, and that's really quite valuable. And then you can just move around. So I think you speak to psychologists who'll tell you that the mind and body are very connected. And if I hit a bit of a wall, I'm really stuck. You're on your computer, and you're just like, oh, I can't focus. I can't think of the right ideas for this. Get up and move, go to a different environment, go for a walk and then come back, or, just get a fresh perspective on things. And it helps. And I like to do walking meetings as well. So I'll just put my headphones in and go for a walk and speak to my team, just verbally. And it's the same in VR. So obviously with what we call the guardian around you to make sure that you're safe in your real environment. But you can move, and you can it just helps anecdotally, it helps the creative juices flow better.
I learned from our last speaker that there's currently 200 different ways of locomotion in VR. So that there's technically there's no winning platform, right? You have everything where you can walk around or stand still and just click on buttons, but the 200 different ways at the moment. So no. Wow. Personally, I would really prefer something where you could actually walk, right? But that is there's lots of different ways, I think, at the moment to do this.
No, that's incredible, and I do actually know people that have the full, the kind of the treadmill type tool that you can walk on whilst. It's a bit too much for me. I don't need that, but I can see why people would enjoy it. So then coming to the third magic eye here, it's the imagination. And this is a really big one for me, because the power of VR is that it enables you to do things that aren't possible. So it's beyond reality. It's beyond what's possible in the real life. And so I always explain VR collaboration as you're not trying to recreate reality. You're not trying to take your boardroom and put it in a virtual environment. Why would you want to do that when you could do it in so many better ways? One of the things I love to use is instant translation. So you can arguably do that on Zoom, but the way that you could do it in VR is talking to someone and you're speaking your mother tongue, they're speaking their mother tongue, and you can either have it translated as words above their avatar's head, or it can be dubbed straight over and it's instant. It's fantastic technology. Or brainstorm on top of Kilimanjaro, or write your notes in dust on the moon. Don't sit in a boardroom in VR. Like this is just crazy talk when you can do it in the most beautiful places on earth. There's a fantastic app, which is not a workplace collaboration tool that I use a lot, called Wanda. And you can go anywhere in the world using not Google Earth. So it uses Google Earth as a basis, but it adds on to it. And you can move around these spaces, you can talk to people, you can, it's very cool. So actually, I think we'll try something quickly. So I just wanted to go into this a little bit deeper here, because with all of these possibilities that are afforded to us in VR, as I've mentioned here, it's a lot of the virtual workplaces that we do have, that they mirror reality. And it's not fun. But there is a psychological reason that this is the case. And it's an idea called structured imagination. So structured imagination means that we tend to rely on existing paradigms when we create things, or when we think about things. So we'll try something just to prove this point briefly. So right now, I want you to imagine an animal that doesn't exist. Imagine an animal that doesn't exist, and be creative as you can be. So just see it in your mind's eye. Okay. So you don't need to draw anything or say anything, just imagine it. Okay. So structured imagination tells me that even though I told you to be as creative as possible, most people will have imagined an animal with limbs of some form and eyes of some form. Maybe some of you won't have done, but most of you will have done. And maybe it's like Leggy Mackay face over here. This was my shot at it, or maybe that's just me. But it's the same when we create these virtual workspaces. We think of an office as a building with a roof and tables and desks and chairs, but we don't need a roof in the metaverse because there's no precipitation. We don't need chairs with legs because the floor isn't really there. In fact, we don't actually need chairs at all. And the problem with recreating things like traditional boardrooms is that we know that they're not conducive to team creativity. And in future studies, this is often called the used future. So it's something we keep doing, even though we know it doesn't exist. So I think as we continue to build these metaverse workplaces of the future and of the present, we really need to start challenging some of these paradigms that we have.
Jody, did you pick this room to be almost exactly like my current boardroom?
It's almost identical.
It's almost identical. We have the same chairs. We have the same television and the glass wall. So it's thanks for that.
Because that would be such a coincidence. I love that.
It's an example of a very boring room, right? So that's
boardroom. Yeah, this is I think if you search on Canva, I think I made this on. You search boring boardroom.
Yeah,
this is what
nice.
But so what do we know about creative collaboration, though? We actually know quite a lot, thankfully. So we know that that retreats, this breaking away from the day-to-day, that can help induce creative thinking. And with VR, you arguably you can retreat anytime. You don't need to get on a plane and spend huge amounts of money getting your entire team to somewhere in the forest, or wherever these people are. We know that some time alone for reflection can help the team come back together, to be more creative when they come back together. We can speak to color psychologists who will tell you that gray is not a good color if you're trying to induce creative thinking. We know that nature, the unexpected, and even messiness can help encourage divergent thinking. So as we build these metaverse workplaces, we can be inspired by our imaginations, but guided by research as well. And I think, this is true for many things in life. Now, a lot of people ask me how far we are away from perhaps a true metaverse, and whatever a true metaverse is. And I don't really have an answer for that. I kind of do, but we would be here for a very, very long time. So if you want to have this debate with me, then drop me an email and we can have it. But there's a couple of things I will say, and that's that the impact that the metaverse will have in our lives will be profound. And firstly, the using VR and using the metaverse for creative collaboration, for communication within teams is not the future, it's the present. So many companies, both large and small, are already buying VR headsets for their employees the same way that they would just buy a laptop originally. And secondly, and importantly, we really need to decide what we want the future to look like in the metaverse. And this point comes from people being, after I speak to people about my research, people get scared. They're like, so, what does this mean for the future? Is this all good? Is this all bad? And it's never all good, all bad. As with anything that humans create, there's a capacity for it to be incredibly positive or devastatingly negative. So just as social media in the previous iteration of the internet, it created jobs that didn't exist before. It gave a voice to the voiceless, and it did incredible good. But on the flip side, it's a double-edged sword. On the flip side, it created dangerous monopolies. It enabled misinformation campaigns that have destabilized entire economies. And so we really need to kind of dig back into one of those human pieces one of those human skills, if you like, that we have, and that's our power of foresight. And our power of foresight is driven by creativity. If we can tap into that power of foresight, we can look at the kind of futures we want to see. So we have an incredible opportunity in front of us to completely reimagine work and how we collaborate together and how we communicate as human beings. But we have to use our human power of forethought to do this. And I really encourage you all to think about how you want to be disrupted, how you want your career to look, and to create that future in advance. And I think I'll stop at that. I think that's a good time to stop and open up to questions. I hope we have a few.
We do. No worries there. So thanks, Jo, for the lecture, and fascinating the whole story. And I think if you combine your story on creativity and workplace transformation, and with all the sort of the technological stories about future headsets coming up and the future chipsets, then I think that the whole thing fits nicely together in sort of seeing what's coming. Hey, there's a question, very direct. Minus the hype and flashy promo videos, what are the companies and teams developing metaverse solutions for the workplace? What are the actual practical, immersive, and seamless things on the market right now? So, because there's also a bit of a vision for the future in there. So, what's the current best workplace solution?
It depends what you're looking for, to be honest. And, when we talk about workplace apps, some of them are more designed for collaboration and meetings, and some of them are more designed for personal productivity. So on the latter side, on the personal productivity, I really like Immersed. I think they're doing really good stuff, and always trying to kind of push the boundaries of what's possible with hand tracking and things like that. The one that people know most about is the Meta Horizons, Meta Workrooms, Horizons Workrooms. Sorry, I get confused with all of the terminology now. The nice thing about that one is, personally, I quite like the Zoom integration on that. It's nice for people that perhaps don't have a VR headset. That's the nicest thing about it. I don't particularly like it. Workrooms is one of the ones that feels a little bit like you're just sitting in another boardroom, to me personally. Mm-hmm. You've got ones like Engage VR. I use Engage VR because I like the imagination in it. I think it scores high on the imagination side. You can have objects in there that you make bigger and smaller. The collaboration, the brainstorming tools in there are great. The environments are cool. In fact, there's everything from a stage, so you can practice speaking, all the way through to kind of more workplace kind of vibes and campfires and things like that. So yeah, those are the three that initially come to mind.
Great. I just shared the links in here, and are they accessible with the Oculus Quest? So is it easy for me to? Then great. And the second question was about neurochemistry. So I think interesting. Any scientific proof that VR experience can change, whether that's hormones or neurotransmitters or any neurochemistry?
I was reading research. It's not my area, so I can't speak to it in any great with any great expertise. But there's a fascinating piece of research I read really recently that looked at brain activity, and it compared being in a VR environment and compared with it being in a face-to-face environment, whilst I think just having a conversation with somebody. Mm-hmm. And they were trying to see whether co-presence looked the same in those two environments. And I can't remember the name of it, but I'm very happy to look and follow up with you, Rens, and share it, because it is really interesting.
Yeah, I'd be quite, ideally, right? If you have a like face-to-face conversation or a, let's say, metaverse conversation for lack of a better word, or a 2D conversation, I would love to see these sort of the metrics. I'm pretty sure they are what we think they are, but it's still interesting to see.
Yeah, agreed.
Kent is asking, as a leader or team lead, and I know Kent is a team lead here, what would you recommend doing with your team or organization based on your research? Yeah. So very practical.
Yeah, so I think the first step is just to get people playing around with VR. It's getting people comfortable with it. And usually the way in is not to throw people into a brainstorm. It's to set up some more social things. So use one of the like VR chat apps, and use it, do a private room where you can play some ping pong together. And use it as that's the way in, and that's the way I'm going to get my current team involved, is using it socially to begin with, and those that buy into it, that like it, and I think most, if not all people, then get them into using it in a little bit more of a constructive workplace way, such as a brainstorm. I really like it for brainstorming, mind mapping, thinking of new ideas, but short spaces of time. That's another thing to bear in mind is, if somebody's never used it before, don't do more than 30 minutes at a time. Because I think Rens mentioned earlier, some people can get a bit of motion sickness. And if that's the case, you don't want to be responsible for that.
Yeah. Great. So, and it would, of course, require that you have a couple of headsets, right? So we have here one in the office, but I think you need 3 or 4 then to get going.
Yeah. And if you're not at the point of wanting to go the full kind of immersive VR hub, there's other ways of stepping forward into other elements of the metaverse there. You can look at some of the, like Verbella has non-VR options, which I think are great. Cozy, I think it's called Cozy, is another nice one. It's a environment for teams to collaborate. That's a little bit more game related. It feels like you're in a little bit of a video game, and there's a few like that are quite nice.
Yeah, nice. Let me. So someone is putting me out of the room. I'm in a webinar with 500 people. Okay. So, yeah.
Sorry? Yeah.
I'm in a webinar. So
we have this room. We booked this room.
Okay. Can you give me 2 minutes?
That one is free.
Yeah. Sorry, Jo. It's we have a very, very urgent booking system here, and it's getting.
Oh, okay.
So the questions on that came about when we discussed the sensors in the headset that track your face and your emotions. What's your take on that? Do you feel that is a risky thing? Because of course that emotional data might stream and might lead to security issues. So
the security issues are massive with VR, and that's one of the elements that my point towards the end there about looking to not to just what the technology is capable of now, but what it might be capable of in future, and planning for that. I always use the example of, I don't think that Mark Zuckerberg sat in his dorm room and imagined that he was about to create one of the world's biggest ad engines. I don't think that was his initial purpose. So we need to look at, the possible unintended consequences of what we're creating. And what's important here is that product people that are creating the actual technologies and the products aren't necessarily aligned with other aspects of business, of policy, of anything else. So there's definitely a need for everybody to work together to kind of think about what these possibilities are. And then you get to the point of policy, and policy is always a step behind what's actually happening in the market. So we need really smart people helping policymakers make the right decisions about how we actually deal with things like personal data, and other issues that are, it's the same as we have now with the internet, but just more so.
Yeah, but now of course the clicks would be, so you might infer emotions because of a click. So you might assume someone liked the ad because they clicked it, but then you would actually have real-time emotional data from entire communities that do work together, right? So that's quite a different data set.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly.
Okay, that's interesting. I have a very simple last question. Are your slides, are they shareable with the group?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I'll share them with you. They don't have a huge amount of information on them. It's just how I like to talk, but anybody's very welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn or email, and I'm happy to chat.
Great. I'll share your details and the slides in the next hour or so, and of course the recording. So with the recording, I think the slides will speak for themselves. Thanks, Joe. Let me quickly check if there are any so really interesting. Thank you so much. Here's another note. Good to have the right balance between virtual and the physical space. I think that's a fair point. Yeah. Okay, I think we went through. So thanks so much for the time, and really enjoyed it. Super inspiring, and I think mostly questions that are relevant for the next few years. So let's see how everything will develop.
Absolutely, I'll come and chat to you again in a couple of years.
Let's do that.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, thank you.
Cheers. Bye bye.